Hey everybody, this is John for Pioneer Nexus MTG coming at you with another deck overview, this time Jeskai Fires of Invention in the Pioneer format. As a friendly reminder, if you do like these informative deck overviews, please consider subscribing to the channel, giving us a thumbs up, giving a constructive comment down below. So Jeskai Fires of Invention is kind of the in-between version of the Enigmatic Fires deck and the Cavalier Karuga Fires deck. This is more of the tap out Planeswalker-esque control deck that dominated the standard format when this deck was part of the format, and also a deck that was very powerful in some of the different stages of Pioneer. You're a Fires of Invention deck, which allows you to play spells equal to the number of lands you have in play. So if you have 5 lands in play, you can play 5. If you have 6, etc. Fires of Invention, a very powerful thing. The downside, you're not able to play things during your opponent's turn. This deck has some ways of mitigating that. You have things like Shark Typhoon, Cycling Nose, etc. But beyond that, you're just a tap-out control deck. You're trying to use things like Birth of Meletus, things like Fable of the Mirror Breaker, Shark Typhoon to put tokens into play, to be able to cast Transmogrify, targeting them, put an Angel of Treachery or Agent of Treachery into play, steal your opponent's big stuff, and then kind of go from there. Beyond that, you're kind of this like tap-out control deck using things like Braid, Birth of Meletus, Deafening Clarion, Supreme Verdict to keep your opponent's creatures in check, and then you get to play powerful planeswalkers like Narset to dig for your missing pieces, the Wandering Emperor to keep your opponent off balance, potentially threaten them if they're a control deck, potentially deal with their creatures, putting an army and a cannon in play. Chandra, Torch of Defiance, allow you to get a little bit of head-on cards and mana. Also deal with your opponent's creatures that way. Teferi, Hero of Dominaria, draws you cards, tucks your problematic permanents in, is a win con on its own, especially with the ultimate. Then Shark Typhoon can be both hard cast and cycled. And then if you're hard casting it, casting a bunch of planeswalkers afterwards, very difficult for your opponent to deal with that board state and snowball and card advantage, etc. Then Fable of the Mirror Breaker, obviously, putting you ahead on mana with the Goblin token, allowing you to filter through your draws, and then on the back end can copy Agents of Treachery and really hammer home your advantage. Beyond that, you're a 3-color mana base. I'm surprised these aren't running Leyline Binding like the Karuga Fires versions were, but you do get to run a 3-color mana base. You get to run a couple copies of Castle Ardenvale and Vantress as ways to get ahead, and then some cycle lands to be able to cycle in the mid-game if you start to flood out a little bit. Sideboard, it's a mix of stuff. Obviously, Yorion allows you to blink all your annoying things, potentially get ahead on a key Fires turn by blinking out your Fires and actually casting a spell. Gets to blink and reset your Planeswalkers, helps you steal more stuff with Agent of Treachery, etc., etc. Dovin's Veto helps you to resolve key spells, can also fight certain combo decks during their key turns if you don't have Fires in play. Mystical Dispute, something very similar, allows you to resolve your Fires of Invention or key spell during a key turn against something like Spirits or Blue-White Control. Ether Gust, primarily here for mono green, can also come in against any type of red decks like Rakdos. Rest in Peace, this deck's a little bit slow and clunky, so something like Grease Fang can be a problem. It also helps in the Izzet Phoenix matchup. Getting into Trials, a little bit of an interesting one. I'm guessing this is primarily for the combo decks out there like Lotus Field. If they can't interact with your Planeswalker, you just get to get the infinite time against them, and then it doesn't matter if they catch their approach to the second sun or whatever, unless they can deal with the Planeswalker fairly efficiently with something like a Fry or something along those lines. This buys you some time to be able to close out the game against something like Lotus Field, and also come in potentially against decks that are relying on 1 or 2 big threats to bubble that. This version, very similar, running a lot of the same cards. Omen in the Sea also helps filter your draws, get some advantage off the Urions. Transmogrify, all these cards we've kind of seen before. So you're seeing 2 copies of Ardenvale, 2 copies of Vantress in this list, some different Tri-lands. Once again, I'm kind of surprised, despite everything, that we're not seeing copies of Leyline Binding in these lists. I know it's not that easiest to cast under Fires, but it's still an efficient removal spell, especially if you're going to be running all these Triomes. Sideboard, you're going to see a lot of the same pieces. You're not going to see Gideon. You're going to see a couple copies of Wear Terror for problematic pieces that your opponent might have, say out of a Karn Wish board, or maybe against an opposing Fires of Invention deck. But the rest of the cards are all things we've seen. Once again, Yorion being the cherry on top. This version has a few more spicy things. No Chain to the Rocks in this version, but we do have a copy of Portable Hole. Fires of Victory is a little bit of more instant speed-based interaction, especially against something like Greasefang. Being able to kill Greasefang in instant speed can be quite valuable. Deafening Clarion as a sweeper, as opposed to some of the other ones we've seen. Touch of the Spirit Realm is a way to an exile on a problematic permanent. You can either, whenever it enters the battlefield, it essentially becomes, or for an artifact or a creature, effectively becomes an Oblivion Ring, or you can channel it to exile on a creature or artifact, return to the battlefield and under control at the beginning of the next end step. Once again, another instant speed interaction spell to buy you a little bit of time without getting around the cost of Fires of Invention itself. Jaya is an interesting one, creating some tokens and getting some card advantage here. Not the best, but helps in the situation. Supreme Verdict, obviously very good at clearing up things. Karn, allowing you to have a little bit of a small wish board. Mightstone and Meekstone, this is a new one. Allows you to kind of accelerate in your other stuff, draw cards, etc. Very powerful 5-mana artifact to have access to. Luca as yet another copy of Transmogrify, as a way to get your Agents of Treachery into play. And then, Shark Typhoon, we've all kind of covered most of this before. This mana base is a little bit different, not quite as many Triomes in this version. Obviously, we're not playing Chain to the Rocks in the main deck. You do get to play a couple copies of Fabled Passage and some actual basics in this one, along with a couple copies of Field of Ruin to disrupt, your opponent's Nykthos or Lotus Field combo. Sideboard, obviously, a lot of the same things. You see a couple of Karn Wish targets and Unlicensed Hearse, very good against the graveyard-based decks, and then Mightstone and Meekstone we've already kind of talked about. Leyline Binding, once again, I'm surprised we're not seeing more of these in these lists, just to be a removal spell. Anger of the Gods against the creature-based decks. Dovin's Veto against combo and control. Mystical Dispute, also a very similar situation. Nahiri, whenever you need to have something to deal with artifacts or enchantments, while also being a way, yet another way to get your potentially your agents out of your deck. Chandra Awakened Inferno, very good against the control decks, as this kind of deck tends to struggle into a deck with a bunch of counter spells, because obviously you're a tap out control deck. Those tend to be a bit of a problem. Overall, this deck's place in the format tends to be fairly reasonable against other mid-range and control deck, or other mid-range decks. Goes over the top of things like even 5-color Niv, some of the other Fires decks that goes over the top of. Tends to be very good against that specific subsection of decks. If you have decent draws, it can line up fairly well against the aggressive decks. You do tend to play a bunch of sweepers, you do play some early interaction. You have this kind of overwhelming control game. But your deck is mainly designed to take on battle cruiser magic. Rakdos midrange, mono black midrange, any of these decks kind of toward the middle. Even against something like mono green, you can steal most of their important stuff. Now sometimes you are a little bit slow for that style of matchup, but it does give you a good thing against those, like Is It Phoenix, those kind of decks. Where it struggles, decks that just don't care what you're doing. Lotus Field combo. You don't really have a lot of interaction for that. Creature decks like Spirits that have a bunch of counter spells to back up their disruption. Counter spells to back up their pressure. Those kind of tend to be the decks where this deck tends to struggle. So, and then obviously it's kind of been supplanted largely by Jeskai Fires and by the other version that I'm drawing a blank on, even though I mentioned it earlier in the video. The enigmatic Fires lists. But if you do like these Fires lists and you like stealing your opponent's stuff, this could certainly be the list for you. And it is a deck that has been floating around for some amount of time, has gotten a few new pieces here and there, but is not as powerful maybe as it once was, as the formats kind of coalesce more around Rakdos and mono green. This is a deck that could certainly hang, especially in your local meta, if you're able to tune it for what you got going on. Be able to steal all your opponent's big stuff, kill them with it sounds pretty fun to me. Your backup plan being having a bunch of powerful planeswalkers and getting a bunch of card advantage that way. All that sounds pretty good. And, you could even do something like Splashing Black for like Nicol Bolas God Pharaoh. There's all kinds of different things you can do with a Fires of Invention deck, especially backed up bunch of powerful planeswalkers and sweepers. Sky's the limit for this deck in terms of what it's capable of. Against most of the meta, you will have obviously matchups you're going to struggle against: Spirits, Lotus Fuel combo, etc. Basically anything that doesn't care about what you're doing. And that's the price you pay for playing in a slightly off-the-wall deck. As always, don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, and hope to see you for the next video.